But let's shift back to one of the top stories that we're all digesting around the world, and that is the game of chicken being played between Greece, Germany, the IMF. A lot of eyes focused on the sovereign debt crisis in Europe right now. And bond giant Pimco saying these aren't issues just staying within the borders of Europe right now. How should investors adjust? Well, joining us now from Newport Beach, California, is Pimco's head of global portfolio management, Scott Mather. Good morning to you, Scott. I mean, game of chicken is how Mohamed El-Arian, your colleague, characterized what we're seeing play out between the Greek Prime Minister, the German government, and the IMF, with the Greek Prime Minister saying, if you don't help us out in the EU, we're going to go over to the IMF for help. What does this do in terms of shaking up any kind of stabilization we thought we had seen with the sovereign debt market?
Well, it certainly is casting a shadow of doubt over the smoothness of the process for dealing with the Greek situation, and you know, points to the risks involved when you have a messy fiscal adjustment like this, which needs to take place. And we foresee this actually being an issue not just for Greece, but for much of the developed world for many years to come. So it's important to not just focus on Greece, but also not lose sight of the fact that this is really a problem that's going to infect the majority of the developed world.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when this issue really just started surfacing, and you heard economists say there's no way that they could possibly go to the IMF. You know, truly very developing countries who aren't nearly as established or within the Eurozone, those are the only countries that could go to the IMF. A country within the Eurozone would never. That would send such a terrible message to the world. Yet now we're talking about it actually being a possibility here. What's changed, Scott?
Well, that's right. It shows you there's no consensus within the Eurozone on how to deal with the Greek situation. And so you have a situation in which you know, the Greeks realize that the majority of Europeans don't want the IMF involved for a whole host of reasons. So they're asking the Eurozone to do something more substantial in terms of providing support to them. And of course, you've got countries like Germany who also realize that the Greeks probably don't want the IMF involved either, because it's very likely that the IMF would impose more severe austerity measures in Greece. So they're using the IMF as really a political tool, and you see them going back and forth to try to each get more concessions from one another.
Yeah, so we talk about this gravity shift quite often in business, and it's really interesting to see this play out in the debt markets here, because you're finding opportunities in the developing world right now, liking their fiscal situations or finding opportunities there. You're looking at India, at Brazil, at Mexico. Where else are you finding opportunity?
Well, what we're seeing is a massive regime shift that's ongoing between really the developed world and the emerging market world. So you've seen the debt dynamics, if you will, deteriorate sharply for the developed world, while they're improving still through the emerging market world. So one has to be careful, even when looking at developed countries, to not assume away the problems just because they haven't been there for the last several decades. We're entering into a new era. So one has to differentiate carefully when looking at developed countries as well. You've got countries with entirely different fiscal dynamics unfolding. Countries that are relatively more favorable in terms of the debt dynamics would be countries like Canada and Germany and Australia. And then there are countries like the peripheral countries in Europe, as well as countries like the UK and the US, which really are on an unsustainable path.
All right. Thank you so much, Scott Mather, head of global portfolio management at Pimco.